The Frozen Crown, January 18, 1701. Königsberg Cathedral, East Prussia. Snow falls silently outside. Inside, candles flicker against stone walls. Nobles line the aisles in silence, breath curling in the cold air. A man walks toward the altar, cloaked in ermine, eyes like flint. He kneels, then rises, and places a crown upon his own head. By the grace of God, we are now king in Prussia. That man was Frederick I, and on that day, a duchy became a kingdom. But what no one in that cathedral could yet see was that this crown would not be the end of Prussia's story. It was only the beginning. This is the story of a state forged in discipline, ambition, and cold steel, a land that rose from obscurity, transformed itself through fire, and eventually united an empire. This is the story of Prussia, the rebellion that built a state, 1525. To understand Prussia's beginning, we must first witness a rebellion. Not one of swords and banners, but of faith. In 1525, the Grand Master of the Teutonic Knights, Albert of Brandenburg, did something unthinkable. He stood before the King of Poland and did two things no knight of the order had ever done. He renounced Catholicism. He swore fealty to a foreign king. By converting to Lutheranism and secularizing the Teutonic Order's lands, Albert created the Duchy of Prussia, the world's first Protestant state, and became its first duke. But it wasn't just a theological move. Albert wasn't surrendering. He was surviving and laying a foundation. He kept the land, kept the army, kept the bureaucracy. But now, without the oversight of Rome or the fading Holy Roman Empire, he ruled with newfound independence, though still as a vassal to Poland. It was a clever trade, autonomy in exchange for homage. But this duchy, remote, wintry, poor, was about to become something far more dangerous. But a duchy can't survive long surrounded by empires. What it needed was family. And the Hohenzollerns were waiting. A family of power. Brandenburg joins Prussia, 1618. The real rise of Prussia began not with war, but with inheritance. In 1618, Albert's line ended, and the Duchy of Prussia passed into the hands of the Hohenzollern family, already rulers of Brandenburg, one of the electorates of the Holy Roman Empire. This created a strange situation. Brandenburg was a powerful state within the empire, but with no kingship. Prussia was outside the empire, smaller, but not bound by imperial law. It was a political paradox, and a golden opportunity. The Hohenzollerns ruled two territories, one within the empire and one free of it. And they knew, if Prussia could grow, it could become their crown. But first, they had to survive the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, the most destructive conflict Europe had seen to date. Prussia was ravaged. Towns burned. Populations scattered. But amidst the ruin rose a leader who would change everything. Frederick William, the Great Elector. He built a standing army in peacetime, created a central treasury, forced the nobles, the Junkers, to serve the state. And when Poland's power faded, he negotiated full sovereignty for Prussia in 1657. No longer a vassal, no longer dependent. Prussia was free. But freedom was only the beginning, because a crown was coming, and it would not be granted by the Holy Roman Emperor. It would be taken, with pride, with politics, and with snow falling in Königsberg. The coronation of a new kingdom, 1701. By the turn of the 18th century, Frederick William's son, Frederick III of Brandenburg, had one obsession, kingship. But he knew the Holy Roman Emperor would never allow a new king within the empire. So he did something brilliant. He asked to be crowned not King of Prussia, but King in Prussia. A subtle, legal fiction that changed history. The emperor agreed. And on January 18, 1701, in Königsberg Cathedral, Frederick crowned himself. Thus, the Kingdom of Prussia was born. It had no great cities, no vast navy, no colonial power, but it had something better, a vision of discipline, an iron will, and a generation of kings who would define European history. But a crown alone doesn't make a king great. That task would fall to a man of contradiction, a flutist and philosopher, who would command armies like thunder. Frederick the Great, music, enlightenment, and war. It said he hated his father. Frederick II, heir to the Prussian throne, was raised under a king who despised softness, who viewed art, philosophy, and emotion as weakness. But Frederick loved music. He adored poetry. He corresponded with Voltaire. And when he became king in 1740, many believed he would be a soft ruler, a man of letters, not legions. They were wrong. In the very first year of his reign, Frederick launched an invasion that would define his legend. He marched into Silesia, a rich province belonging to the Austrian Habsburgs. The move was calculated, cold, and completely unexpected. What followed was the War of Austrian Succession, and Prussia won. A small kingdom had humiliated an empire. But Frederick wasn't done. In 1756, he gambled again, this time against France, Austria, Russia, and Sweden in what became the 7 Years' War. Outnumbered, outmatched, surrounded, and yet, he held them off. Through sheer military brilliance, discipline, and perhaps luck, Frederick survived. Prussia didn't just endure, it emerged stronger. He had proved something. Prussia was no longer just a kingdom. It was a power, and the world noticed. But with victory came appetite. And across the border, a crumbling kingdom would soon feed that hunger. The first partition, Poland disappears. To the east, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, once mighty, was dying by inches. Corruption, invasion, division. And in 1772, three empires saw an opportunity: Russia, Austria, and Prussia. In what would become one of the coldest moves in European politics, they agreed to divide Poland among themselves, slicing off provinces like meat from bone. Prussia took Royal Prussia, the bridge between East and West Prussia, creating a continuous kingdom. It wasn't conquest by war. It was conquest by diplomacy, and it changed the map of Europe. More partitions followed in 1793 and 1795, and Poland ceased to exist. Prussia now stretched from the Niemen River to the Elbe. Its power was undeniable. But power breeds enemies. And a storm was rising in France. And when the revolution came, when kings fell like dominoes, Prussia would soon face an enemy it couldn't predict, and a genius it couldn't defeat. Napoleon crushes Prussia and awakens it. In 1806, Frederick the Great's successors faced a new kind of war. Not aristocratic, not traditional, but modern, fast, ruthless. Napoleon Bonaparte crushed Prussia at the Battle of Jena-Auerstedt. The Prussian army collapsed. Berlin fell. Even the royal family fled. It was the greatest humiliation in Prussian history. But in defeat, something new stirred. A group of reformers, including Baron von Stein, Scharnhorst, and Hardenberg, began a total transformation. Military reform, based on merit, not birth. Education reform, public schools, national pride. Administrative reform, breaking noble privilege. By the time Napoleon was defeated in 1815, Prussia was reborn. Stronger, smarter, hardened. At the Congress of Vienna, Prussia was rewarded with new territories, in the Rhineland and Westphalia. Not just land, but the industrial heart of Germany. And with that came wealth, came steel, came destiny. But destiny is never given. It's taken. And the man who would take it would wear no crown. He would wield no sword. But his will was iron. The Iron Chancellor, Bismarck's rise. He didn't look like a conqueror. Otto von Bismarck was born into a noble family, but he wasn't raised for war. He studied law. He was sarcastic, unapologetically conservative. But above all, he understood power. Not the kind wielded by generals, but the kind wielded by minds. In 1862, Bismarck was appointed Prime Minister of Prussia, and almost immediately, he made his philosophy clear. The great questions of the day will not be decided by speeches and majority votes, but by blood and iron. He wasn't interested in ideology. He was interested in results. And his mission was simple and terrifying. Unite the German states under Prussian rule, even if it meant war. And war is exactly what he brought. But not chaos, calculated conflict. 3 wars, 1 goal, and a new empire. The wars that forged a nation. 1. War against Denmark, 1864. The spark came from a forgotten corner of Europe, Schleswig and Holstein, two duchies claimed by Denmark but populated by Germans. Bismarck allied with Austria, a temporary friendship, and together they crushed Denmark. Prussia took Schleswig. Austria took Holstein. But this wasn't about land. It was about bait. 2. War against Austria, 1866. Just 2 years later, Bismarck accused Austria of mismanaging Holstein. It was a trap, and Austria fell for it. The war was swift, brutal. At Königsberg, the Prussian army, armed with a rapid-firing needle gun and directed by railroad logistics, crushed the Austrians. Austria was expelled from German affairs. Prussia created the North German Confederation under its own rule. The path was almost complete. Only one enemy remained: France. 3. War against France, 1870 to 1871. France, under Napoleon III, feared a united Germany. Bismarck leaked a doctored telegram, the EMS dispatch, insulting the French king. The bait worked. France declared war and walked straight into the fire. Prussia and the German states united. They encircled the French at Sedan. Napoleon III was captured. Paris was besieged. And then, in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, a moment centuries in the making unfolded. The duchy was long gone. The kingdom had served its purpose. Now, it was time for the empire to rise. Proclamation of the German Empire, 1871. On January 18, 1871, inside the glittering mirrors of Louis XIV's palace at Versailles, a place chosen for symbolism, not diplomacy, the German princes declared, "We proclaim Wilhelm of Prussia as Kaiser Wilhelm I, Emperor of Germany." It was a full-circle moment. 170 years earlier, a man had placed a modest crown on his head in Königsberg. Now, in the heart of France, his descendant was crowned emperor. Prussia had done the impossible. It had united the German states, not through culture or compromise, but through precision, war, and realpolitik. But with every empire comes a shadow. Because in forging unity through conquest, Bismarck had also forged a nation addicted to strength, to order, to control. And that addiction would cost everything. The empire had risen. But Prussia's soul, discipline, militarism, hierarchy, would soon be tested in the deadliest conflict the world had ever seen. The empire inherits the Prussian spirit. With Wilhelm I crowned Kaiser in 1871, the German Empire was born, but it was Prussia at the wheel. The emperor, king of Prussia. The army, dominated by the Prussian general staff. The aristocracy, Junker nobility from East Prussia. The discipline, the bureaucracy, the nationalism, all Prussian in blood and spirit. Even the capital remained Berlin. Not Frankfurt. Not Munich. The empire wore German colors, but it spoke in Prussian commands. Otto von Bismarck continued to rule as chancellor, mastering European diplomacy with a balance of force and fear. He isolated France, kept Russia close, maintained peace by threat of war. But Bismarck had warned, the great European war will come out of some damned foolish thing in the Balkans. And when he was dismissed in 1890 by the new Kaiser, his prophecy was set in motion. Because the man who replaced him wasn't a diplomat. He was a Kaiser obsessed with power, prestige, and naval dominance. And he would steer Prussia's legacy toward disaster. Wilhelm II and the descent into war. Kaiser Wilhelm II, the grandson of Queen Victoria, inherited the empire at its peak and promptly abandoned everything that made it stable. He launched Weltpolitik, world politics, aiming to make Germany a global power. He built a massive navy to challenge Britain. He alienated France and Russia. And in 1914, when Austria-Hungary clashed with Serbia, Germany backed its ally without hesitation. What followed was World War I, a war of trenches, poison gas, industrial slaughter, and shattered illusions. Prussia's legendary army, once feared for its precision and loyalty, was ground down in the mud of the Western Front. In 1918, after 4 years of blood and collapse, Germany surrendered. Wilhelm II abdicated, and the empire fell. But what fell wasn't just an emperor. It was an identity. The end of Prussia, erased by history. The Treaty of Versailles didn't just punish Germany. It targeted Prussia, the state blamed for German militarism and ambition. Its monarchy was abolished. Its military was shattered. And in 1947, the Allied powers formally dissolved Prussia. No more kings. No more junkers. No more Iron Cross, Black Eagle, or disciplined cadence of boots. The name Prussia vanished from maps, its lands absorbed by Poland, Russia, and post-war Germany. It was gone. A kingdom that had risen from a broken crusade, that had crowned itself in snow, that had united a continent under steel and silence. Erased. But a name can vanish. A crown can fall. Yet a legacy can linger. And what Prussia left behind still shapes the world we live in. What Prussia left behind. Today, the buildings are ruins. The borders have changed. The crown is gone. But Prussia's ghost still walks through Europe. In modern Germany's bureaucracy, you hear the echo of Prussian administration. In the precision of its engineering, you glimpse the legacy of its discipline. In its caution toward war, you feel the memory of 2 world wars. And yet, there's awe in what Prussia achieved. From a rebellious monk knight, to a self-made king in a frozen cathedral, to a strategist who played empires like chess. It rose. It ruled. It fell. But in its rise, we saw what vision and order could accomplish. And in its fall, we learned how power, unchecked, can swallow the very thing it built. Prussia is gone. But its shadow, it still moves. If that journey stunned you too, this channel is where the forgotten becomes unforgettable. Subscribe and stay curious. Share this if you think more people should know how one duchy redefined a continent. Comment below. Do you think Prussia was a force for greatness, or a warning from history?